My best friend kicked me out, stole my stuff, and flaunted it online. I became my own lawyer, got $3K judgment, and settled. After perusing the incredible narratives shared by everyone, I realized it was time to recount my own experience. Summary: my closest friend of 15 years unlawfully evicts me, takes my belongings, and then presumes he can evade accountability as I become a self-taught lawyer. This has been revised for spelling errors, and I apologize for the lengthy nature of this narrative. I endeavored to present it as clearly as possible. Background: my friend, Dan, and I have been acquaintances since 5th grade. For context, he is a homosexual man and I am a woman. We sustained our friendship into adulthood as we both commenced our lives with our individual significant others. I was married in 2012, and he wed shortly after. My husband and I purchased a house in early 2015, and Dan and his spouse soon followed suit, also opting to buy or rent a home. However, shortly thereafter, I began confronting feelings I had suppressed for many years, ultimately realizing that I am a lesbian and needed to leave my husband. To clarify, my now ex-husband is a wonderful individual and did not cause this, as others in my life have speculated. His family, whom I also cherished, moved into our larger home to ensure he was not alone after my departure and has always been surrounded by loved ones. He wished for my happiness and to be true to myself, and he has subsequently found love again, so there are no hard feelings between us. At this juncture, I informed Dan of my need to live independently. Given that they were renting a multi-bedroom house they could not afford on their own, they graciously invited me to occupy one of the rooms and agreed that I could stay for a few months rent-free until I got back on my feet. I was immensely grateful and moved into the room. However, a few days later, they approached me to request that I start paying for the room immediately due to Dan's medical issues which left him unable to work. Naturally, I agreed, as their request seemed entirely reasonable. Weeks passed without incident, allowing me to experience single adult lesbian life for the first time since I had been in a relationship since college. This newfound freedom felt surreal. Shortly thereafter, they decided to rent out another room in their home, and to my surprise, it was another lesbian woman, whom I will refer to as A. We realized that we share the same birthday, Valentine's Day, and even our pets have matching birthdays. We quickly formed a close friendship, becoming platonic partners in crime, frequenting gay bars on the weekends, looking fabulous, and attracting the attention of attractive women within the gay community. It was a delightful time filled with wonderful memories. I know what you're thinking, and rest assured, we have always remained strictly friends. However, this is when Dan began to feel jealous and irritated that the new roommate was not only spending considerable time with me, but also being inadvertently reckless, such as leaving an empty wine bottle in his bathroom. He was sober, and bringing people back from the club late at night. I admit my fault in one instance. After Dan expressed his discomfort, I ceased participating in bringing people home. Nevertheless, Dan was unaware that I had not gone out with her on that particular night, and that the wine bottle was not mine, leading him to believe we were both culpable for these incidents without communicating this to me, which would have allowed me to clarify my innocence. The setup. Tensions began to rise in the household as I continued paying my rent promptly every month, as any reasonable tenant would by this point. I had been there for about 3 months. Then Dan introduced another roommate, a middle-aged woman he knew from work, and her teenage daughter, who moved into the basement. This woman was a tyrant. I shall refer to her as Tyrant. Following this, Dan brought in yet another roommate, E, who began staying on the couch with plans to take A's room once she vacated it. Instigated by the tyrant's overbearing behavior, Dan left me a note stating that I had to vacate within 5 days. Being young and unaware of my rights, I felt stressed and unsure of what to do. I lacked the means to move all my belongings and had no alternative place to go. A few days later, I received a text from Dan stating, "Hey, Tyrant told me she heard you and a talking and that you think I am obligated to give you 30 days notice to move out, but that's incorrect because there is no lease." I found this perplexing, as we had never discussed such matters, and I hadn't even researched my rights, so no such dialogue ever transpired. I assumed that, since there was no lease, I had no standing and must comply with their demand to vacate. I confided in my sister about my predicament, who relayed my situation to my father, who came to my aid, showing up at the house with his trailer prepared to help me relocate my belongings without my requesting assistance. Can we take a moment to appreciate my father for being my knight in shining armor during this embarrassing and intimidating scenario? Dan had deliberately chosen to leave town during my moving day, but his husband remained behind and seized the opportunity, becoming quite intoxicated while his sober partner was absent. He was so inebriated yet attempted to play the nice guy role, which he often resorted to, volunteering to help me move my belongings, slurring his words, and regretting it when I accepted his offer to carry a box outside for me. I managed to remove all the items from the room that he was slated to occupy, but I still had several belongings that wouldn't fit in my vehicle, so I placed them in the garage. They had recently held a garage sale, and since I sell both new and vintage clothing online, I had a considerable amount of inventory that I had also contributed for sale at the garage sale. A few weeks after the sale, the two-car garage remained entirely packed with the unsold items from the sale, as if nothing had been sold. Consequently, in an effort to clear the space as they had requested, I took the remaining personal items that I couldn't fit into my car, including roughly 1/4 of the clothing that had been hanging in my closet, and added them to my garage sale inventory. I informed Dan's husband that I was unable to fit everything, but had placed it in the garage and would return shortly for the rest, to which he kindly responded that there was no rush. About a day after I had left, I began receiving text messages with pictures of the carpet in my room, displaying animal urine stains throughout the floor. They accused my cat of causing the stains, expressing tremendous anger, insisting I was accountable for cleaning it, yet I explained that I was fully aware that their cat had entered my room while I was at work, as they had closed the door behind them, effectively trapping the cat inside. Upon returning home, I would open my door, and their cat would dart out, revealing a puddle where it had urinated in my room, confirming their cat's trespasses. They had cleaned one stain early on after I informed them, but I refrained from bringing this up later, as they had made a significant deal about addressing it the first time, and I wanted to avoid escalating any conflict. Previously, I had ordered breakfast to go and left it in my room for my return. When I arrived home, I discovered that one of them had left my door open, allowing their dog to invade and chew up my food from the dresser. I felt annoyed, as personal boundaries and privacy matter, and I was apprehensive it would cause tension between us. As such, during the second and third instances of their cat urinating in my room, I simply cleaned it as best as I could and covered it with a rug, not wanting to see the mess. However, I am certain my cat does not have accidents, as she has been my companion for several years without incident. He accused me of attempting to conceal the stains with a rug, which I openly admitted to doing, stating that I merely didn't want to look at the mess. I clarified that I knew it was their cat, and that they were trying to misplace the blame. Their approach to acquiring and getting rid of animals mirrored their financial habits. I mentioned that had I received more than just a few days' notice to leave, I would gladly have washed the carpets myself. I even offered to return the following day equipped with my father's carpet cleaner, but he was not open to this. At that moment, he declared I was no longer welcome at his home and that our 15-year friendship was finished. Fast forward approximately a week, and I had a day off work to retrieve my remaining items. I began texting Dan, asking if anyone was home so I could collect my belongings, but he started ignoring me and blocking me on various social media platforms. After about 4 days of this, I opted to show up at the house with my girlfriend to get my things. We arrived, observed the garage door was open, yet I could clearly see my items were missing. The garage was still crammed with their untouched belongings from the sale. The sole remnant of my presence was a solitary pink hanger lying abandoned on the ground. I approached the front door, rang the doorbell, and saw the tyrant peek her head around the corner. I explained I was there for my belongings, to which she retorted, "Call Dan," and I replied, "I have, and he's ignoring me." She slammed the door in my face, closed the garage, and I retreated to my car to call the police. Naturally, they responded with the usual, "This is a civil matter," rhetoric, and offered no assistance. At this point, I sadly acknowledged that my items were likely gone. I noticed Dan's vehicle in the driveway, its sunroof and windows open, confirming he was home yet hiding from me. In a bid to cheer me up and execute a bit of anticipated revenge, my girlfriend took an old half-finished frappuccino from my car. It was not so old, just left in the heat for about 9 hours that day, and poured it through the sunroof into his car, splattering curdled whipped cream and coffee throughout the interior. This served as foreshadowing for what was yet to come. Revenge main course. I returned home defeated, burdened by the memories of the belongings I left behind, notably a few heirloom garments crafted by my grandmother which had been passed down to me. This left me deeply dispirited and hurt, and several months later, I began conducting research. I explored local tenant laws and recognized that Dan's actions were unequivocally unlawful. In Minnesota, it is mandatory to provide a tenant with 30 days' notice to vacate if that tenant has been paying rent consistently, regardless of whether a lease exists. Moreover, they are obligated to store my possessions and attempt to return them to me for approximately 60 to 90 days following my departure before they can dispose of them. It became starkly evident that they had completely overstepped their bounds in this situation. Under no circumstances would I ever dispose of or handle someone else's belongings, especially without providing sufficient notice to vacate. I was furious, but the final straw came when, using my girlfriend's social media, I checked their Facebook pages and was astounded to see photos of Dan wearing multiple articles of clothing that belonged to me, and there was still more. Upon examining the social media profiles belonging to those around them, I discovered pictures of the tyrant's daughter wearing my clothes. Then, I looked at E's social media and found her in a shirt gifted to me by my sister for my birthday. All these items were ones I could not fit in my vehicle. My outrage reached new heights. It was evident they had rummaged through my possessions, taken what they desired, and discarded the remainder. He had made it explicitly clear that our friendship was finished, and I promised myself that if I could not restore our friendship, at least I would recover my losses. While part of me had still hoped my belongings would be returned, this was the definitive moment of realization. I embarked on researching the process for recovering losses through small claims court and sent formal demand letters requesting the return of my items, which they ignored. I began compiling my case, including text messages, photographs, and pertinent details. They disregarded all my correspondence, ultimately leading to a court date. I arrived at court expecting them to contest my claims, but they failed to show up. The odds were stacked greatly against them. From unlawfully evicting me to the disappearance of my belongings and the evidence of them donning my clothing, there was no chance for them to defend themselves. I attended court thoroughly prepared, valuing all my store merchandise at garage sale prices using the Goodwill Appraisal Guide, which was considerably below its actual value. The judge recognized my preparedness and reasonable conduct, awarding me my awarded amount approximately $3,000. This marked a celebratory moment in what had been a long journey. Months to a year passed with no ability to contact Dan, as he had blocked me on everything, and through social media, I became aware that they had moved out of that house we all shared, most likely to escape the tyrant, whom even they admitted was excessively controlling. Eventually, I managed to trick Dan's husband into answering a call from a hidden number, where I confronted him regarding my belongings, to which he exclaimed, "You'll never get us to pay." Oh, now it was on. Prior to this, I had been deliberating about what steps to take, but following that phone conversation, I knew I was committed to seeking justice. I repeatedly thought about the cherished clothing given to me by my grandmother and the merchandise I had invested in to support myself. Pursuing this matter would present challenges, but I kept reminding myself, I refuse to lose both my friend and my possessions. If this friendship is genuinely over, then I will ensure I recover my items. The next step would involve seeking a wage garnishment, since he was not paying what he owed me. I encountered a roadblock when the necessary documents for garnishment were continually returned to the courthouse as undeliverable. Since I had no knowledge of their new address, I felt lost at this stage. On the third certified letter returned to the court, a clerk called and explained that because all prior letters had failed to reach them, she wanted to spare me time and money in court fees by not sending out the next one. I detailed my situation, describing that I lacked their address, and she empathized with my plight. I mentioned that some court records indicated a nearby city associated with their names, which I suspected was their new location, but I lacked the precise street address. We concluded our call, and I feared this was as far as I could go. Within minutes, I received a follow-up call from the clerk, informing me she'd done some digging and unearthed their updated address within the system, sharing it with me. "Joan, you sweet angel," I exclaimed. I had previously read on a self-help small claims website that court clerks could not assist with such queries, and this likely exceeded Joan's job responsibilities, violating her job's protocols. This woman was truly my saving grace. Without her, I would have been entirely stymied. Finally, they received the documentation notifying them that I intended to initiate wage garnishment. Then, bam! They filed for bankruptcy. Since the original judgment, they continued accumulating credit card debt and expenses, shopping, etc., consistent with their usual financial behavior, all with the intention of filing for bankruptcy upon my discovering their location to initiate garnishment. Naturally, this meant I needed to delve deeper into the implications of this on my case, navigating the complexities of bankruptcy court, which is less accessible for the average person to maneuver without legal representation compared to small claims court. They mistakenly believed that by declaring bankruptcy, they would absolve the debt owed to me. However, this pertains to inability to pay typical bills, failing to comprehend that judgments resulting from malicious intent are not included. I learned that I would need to refile the claim within bankruptcy court to assert my judgment, but also substantiate that he had taken my items with malicious intent. Once more, I gathered my evidence and prepared to advocate for my claim in court. I completed the necessary paperwork independently, securing a court date. Just before the inaugural court date, creditors' meeting, an attorney reached out on their behalf attempting to intimidate me. He asserted that the landlord-owner of the residence had shown up and decided to do some spring cleaning. She allegedly discovered surplus items in the garage and donated them, and was willing to testify, thus implying I wouldn't be able to substantiate my claim of malicious intent. He suggested I withdraw my case, and I was trembling with anxiety. My voice quavered, but I stood my ground, insisting I could not be misled. I possessed all the evidence indicating they wore my items, and the garage remained full of belongings that were not mine. The attorney knew this and had a copy of my claim, but still attempted to coerce me. Having never encountered the owner of the house during my residency, the notion of her appearing and manipulating people's belongings the very week I vacated was utterly implausible. I refused to relent, and the creditors' meeting transpired. I arrived in my most polished, legally blonde, legal attire. What, like it's hard? And when Dan spotted me walking through the doors, he appeared as though he might implode. This meeting wasn't obligatory, yet I wanted to convey to him that I was unwavering in my intentions. Nothing substantial transpired at the meeting, but I submitted my claim to the bankruptcy court, unsure of my next steps, but resolute in my research of how to navigate what came next. A week or two elapsed, and then I received another call from their attorney, his tone dramatically different this time. He sought to negotiate a settlement. He offered me $1,000 to bring closure to this matter. I'll need to consider that," I replied, ultimately declining since I had already assessed the value of my belongings and wanted to maintain a reasonable case in front of the judge. He then proposed $1,000 upfront, followed by $150 monthly payments for 4 months after that. I informed him that the lump sum was not essential in my view, and that it was not my intention to cause them undue hardship, but he confirmed that this was their offer, and I accepted. After 4 years, I had finally triumphed, and knowing they had to concede after previously claiming they wouldn't pay served as a gratifying conclusion to this ordeal. I accepted the payments, which included an apologetic note with the final installment. While the money could not replace the heirloom pieces from my grandmother, it arrived at a critical juncture in my life when I faced depression and needed to take a leave of absence from work, which was unrelated to this case. It significantly assisted me in maintaining my livelihood during a turbulent time. I managed to navigate this process entirely by myself without legal counsel, yet I still deeply miss our friendship. Ultimately, I believe Dan was acting out of hurt due to my newfound friendship, and in retrospect, I suspect he mistakenly thought that the items in the garage held no sentimental value for me, merely categorizing them as leftovers from a garage sale. All of this could have been resolved through clear communication, which he failed to provide. Since that last letter he sent, we have not communicated, although I would eagerly welcome the chance to mend what was lost. Perhaps it was more an act of justice than vengeance, but in the end, I achieved my goal, all while dressed in a pencil skirt. Edit to add, although I technically settled for less, it remains a victory for me. Most of the merchandise clothing I acquired for mere cents, as I worked at Goodwill and received a discount. I would definitely prefer receiving the payout than investing the time and effort required to sell those items, a task I had no desire to undertake. The high-value items I actually received full price for, while the routine, everyday items I appraised at Goodwill pricing, still far more than I originally paid for them. Thus, I was far happier obtaining the settlement at a lesser amount than having to invest hours photographing, listing, and trying to sell them online. Ultimately, I profited from the settlement.